Bastille Day chaos in Nice, France is trending on several social media websites. There has been an outpouring of support on Twitter. And here are just a few of the tweets from thousands that have been pouring in by the second. From anger to sadness, it has been an emotional show of support. Of course, we will continue to monitor the situation. Again, at least 77 dead right now. Joining me in the studio is Daveed Gartenstein-Ross. He's an adjunct assistant professor in Georgetown University's Security Studies program. No claims of responsibility just yet, but I want to get your read on what you think happened, what you've been seeing, what you've been hearing.
I think the likely perpetrators are the Islamic State, or as the U.S. acronymizes it, ISIL. You've had just a large number of attacks that have occurred across multiple countries that have either been inspired by or else connected to the external operations network of this organization. It's been able to surge those attacks, and right now it's in an attack posture, unlike Al-Qaeda. I think that there's always a default reaction to see these things as lone wolf terrorism, and I've already seen some people, some analysts saying that this is lone wolf, but I think it's a real mistake to make that our default assumption.
Was it because of the weapons and what was involved? I mean, you had to probably have some planning. This was a closed street. This truck seemed to just go through that promenade for quite some time, at least a kilometer.
Absolutely. There's the weapons, and then there's just the fact that it's not that difficult for a network to be connected to these attacks. We've seen that happen in multiple times where even if it's a somewhat localized network, like the recent attack in Malaysia with the grenade, there's a connection to the Islamic State's external operations where they give the go order for that attack. But let's talk actually about what you just said. The truck went for a kilometer. That's remarkable. I think when you look at these mass casualty attacks, there have been these awful attacks. You know, the Bataclan attack, of course, the Pulse nightclub attack, and this one. One thing they have in common.
Airports.
Well, there's the airport, but I want to focus on those three because one thing that seems to be the case is that in all of them, you didn't have an architecture that was designed for a crisis. In Bataclan, in Pulse, both of those attacks, you had very open spaces, a lot of people packed in, few exits, nothing to slow down an attacker. The fact that this truck went for a kilometer means it went for that kilometer without there being a spike strip, without there being a barrier that it had to hit, most likely. I mean, as we go through it, there may have been some barriers, but they were able to he was able to plow down pedestrians for a full kilometer. That's remarkable, and one thing that's indicative is they weren't planning for a crisis where something like this could have occurred. And look, in pointing out that Inspire had talked about just this kind of attack, you obviously can't have 100% security, but I would be interested in what kind of precautions had gone in ahead of time in case someone tried to attack the crowd.
Now, it's interesting because France was still technically and still is under a state of emergency. Nice did host some of the Euro 2016 matches. So wouldn't there have been sort of an anticipation of a level of security? It's Bastille Day, a lot of people. Why wouldn't there have been more security?
That's an excellent question. I mean, that's the question that should be asked. Now, the fact that a lot of people die never shows that a mistake had been made. But to me, the fact that the truck was able to go for a full kilometer, I really question the planning. And, you know, a truck or a car trying to plow people down, that's not only the kind of thing that was in Inspire, it's the kind of attack that we see happen in Israel, for example, all the time. You know, one thing that we've had trouble doing in Western countries, which of course are open countries where there's a lot of vulnerabilities because these are free societies. But I think we need to get better at anticipating, without just trying to harden everything, anticipating to create kind of internal security, such as barriers along the way that could stop a truck, or barriers where people can hide, or that will slow down an attacker in a club. These are the kind of things we need to think about, because not just terrorism, but mass shootings and other tragic events do happen. And one of the places where they have the most casualties is where the internal design of a street or a club just isn't there to slow down an attacker.
There's a lot of talk about the way the French intelligence system is set up, that it's too cumbersome. Talk about France as being a target. Why France, and what can be done? I mean, what's the solution here? Does France need to close its borders? I mean, I'm sure we'll hear some people suggesting that with the mass migration that we've seen with refugees. What's the answer?
There are multiple reasons France is a target, but I think rather than focusing on the grievance end, which is where people normally talk about it, I think the thing that most determined France as a target is that ISIL has two different major external operations networks aimed at Europe, and then more than two. But generally speaking, you have a division between Francophone and Anglophone networks. And the Francophone networks, like the one that extended from Paris into Brussels, is quite strong. So one thing I would hypothesize is that if there is a connection to ISIL, and I think it is quite likely that there is one, that we'll see the Francophone network being a part of that. And so rather than like grievances and why they hate France, and there certainly are grievances, and we could talk about those, I think that this is likely determined much more by the networks that they have in place that are meant to deploy. As to the solution, look, it's never easy. Clearly, the mass migration into Europe is making things more dangerous. There's no question about that. Terrorists have gotten in, including in the Paris plot previously, by moving through migration routes. And Europe has been basically largely asleep at the switch. You mentioned the internal bureaucracies within French intelligence. You recently had a report come out in France recommending reforms. I think that's important. You have an intelligence service in France which isn't suited to these fast-moving jihadist networks and these 21st century challenges of violent non-state actors who want to kill large amounts of people. Intelligence services need to get more nimble, more coordinated to be able to deal with a threat of this magnitude, particularly as you've had this boom in encryption, which eliminates a lot of the advantage in electronic surveillance that Western states are used to enjoying.
All right, Daveed Gartenstein-Ross, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you, as always, for